an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Deadwood The Movie. Brought to you by who else? Patrick. In this film, I can't imagine how satisfying this must have been to people who have been waiting forever and pretty much gave up hope. I'm sure I would have. It is magical enough to me, and I only just finished the series, and I just feel like this is one of those movies that I almost think the time between when the series ended and the movie began was a gift rather than a curse. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everybody. I am Natasha. I know that I have already said thanks to Patrick a bunch of times, but I'm going to say it again because I can't imagine not having watched this show. And I have finally gotten Rashawn on it, and she just texted me like for half the day yesterday about how she can't believe how good it is and that she hadn't watched it already and how much she loved the dialogue. And when I told her it was an iambic pentameter, she almost had a heart attack. It is the kind of thing that as soon as you watch it, you need everybody else to have watched it. So at first, when Patrick was commissioning so consistently, I was just like, wow, okay, well, apparently he really likes the show. But now I really get it. Now I get it a lot more why you'd be like, oh my God, please fucking do this. And this movie is so surreal for somebody like me who had just finished my first watch to see these actors having aged and the set had to be rebuilt. I don't know how many of you, after I watched the movie, last night I spent a bunch of time looking up different articles about them making it and what went into getting everybody back together and the whole like uncertainty of it all. And I was really interested in the fact that that set has been used by a million other Western movies and shows. I mean, you know, everybody knows, I think, that Westworld was filmed on the same set. But Westworld, they had to take down a bunch of parts of it. So when they went to film the Deadwood movie, the like Bullock House, for example, was completely gone. And tragically, and this is something that I find amazing that it can happen when it's such a professionally done show. It's HBO, for God's sake. But when the original show was canceled so abruptly, they did not hang on to the blueprints for the sets. Like, people were so upset and angry that they tossed everything. So when they had to rebuild the sets, they had to watch the show and stop it like frame by frame to capture what details they could see in all of the shots and reconstruct the set from the show, which is the most painstaking thing I've ever heard. Like, that's just such a huge amount of work. But these people making this movie are aware how completely rabid the fans of the show are, and that they're going to be watching and paying attention to the details, and they will notice if things don't really match up. Now, of course, as you start this movie, it's clear that not everything is going to match up because Deadwood has been expanded. It has been refined. A lot of the buildings are better constructed than they used to be. There's the Bullock Star Hotel that is made out of all stone, which is a whole new prospect. And it is obvious that there have been a lot of changes within the actual community, like in the context of the show. But I just was really fascinated by the fact that the sets were so, and there was also a fire on the set. And so it's kind of ironic. They had to rebuild a bunch of things because of that as well. And there had been a fire in Deadwood, like it burned down. I'm not sure if this movie is supposed to take place after it's been rebuilt from the fire or before the fire happens. So Patrick, if you know anything about that, let me know. But the getting to the like whole crew back together, all of the people who worked on the show originally, it was like they had all been sort of waiting on hold when the show was first canceled, expecting to be picked up for a movie pretty quickly. And it didn't happen. And they all sort of went their separate ways. And I was very surprised to find out that Timothy Olyphant, who plays Seth Bullock, had a really hard time playing Seth. He didn't really like playing him and found himself constantly second-guessing his acting choices and asking to redo scenes. And when he found out that the show was canceled, initially he was really pleased, like secretly pleased, even though he had just bought a house and it was not financially convenient, but he was like ready to move on to something else and felt like he wasn't doing the show justice. So he was one of the few people who, in getting the originals back together, was a little bit less excited about it and concerned about trying to reignite a spark on something that was so singular and special, and feeling like it was destined to fail. But in the interview that I read, he talked about how gratified he was by the way that everything came together, and how much he realized after the fact he had learned from people on the set, that so many things that are just like vocal tics of his, or things that he would say before starting something, a scene or whatever, he had actually picked up from folks that he worked with in Deadwood, and didn't even realize until joining back up with them over a decade later and hearing them say something that he thought he was the only one who said. And there are things like that that I really loved reading about, the experience of actors who were coming back to this. And the table read, which is normally something that everybody just kind of blows through. Like, the table read is just meant for everybody to get a sense of what's happening this scene, what's your character doing this scene. You're not really supposed to even put much like acting into it. You're just supposed to sort of go through it. When they all sat down, they like couldn't get through it without crying. I mean, the woman who plays Jane has the first line, 10 years gone. And she said that she couldn't even like say her first fucking line of the whole thing without like choking up. And it just sort of signaled what a complete emotional experience this was for everybody, because it just, they all assumed it would never happen. And David Milch, who wrote it all, is tragically, he has been diagnosed with Alzheimer's. And I get extremely emotional lately talking about Alzheimer's, because I have an aunt who I love, who is one of my favorite people ever, who is going through it, and it is horrible to watch. I cannot emphasize enough how much Alzheimer's specifically is like one of the cruelest diseases I've ever seen. And she is somebody that I get along with so well, and we had this amazing phone conversation. And afterwards, she called my mother and told her that we got in a big fight and I hung up on her, which did not happen. But she remembers it as if it really did. And Milch wrote Al going through similar like decomposition of faculties to reflect what he himself is going through. And even if this movie is this massive success, the chances of Milch being able to get it together enough to write another script are pretty much non-existent. This is it, you know. And the one thing that sort of saved them is that Milch had been working on the script for this movie for fucking 10 years, basically. And so they were able to pull it together because so much of it had been done when he was still totally mentally sound. So I just wanted to give that bit of background because it is really just such a tragedy to me that a mind that came up with a show that is so complex, so carefully crafted. And when people use the word crafted, a lot of times I'll roll my eyes, but there is no other word for the scripts that they have gone through in this show. Crafted is the word. They're meticulous. They're in fucking iambic pentameter. I mean, what more do you need to say? Not that that just makes something good, don't get me wrong, but the fact that the dialogue can be as good as it is, and then you find out that extra layer is just kind of insane. Patrick says the original plan was that season 4 was going to end with a flood and season 5 was going to end with a fire. Huh. It flooded too, huh? Damn. Deadwood really. And he says he fucking killed it. He was great in this. Oh, about Seth. Yes, definitely. And additionally, real quick trivia bit that I did not know about. The set is like on this completely flat desert and all of the mountains and the pine trees and everything are CGI'd in afterwards, which I didn't really stop and think about where the set actually was located. It looks so completely real to me that it didn't even occur to me, but there you have it. Okay, starting off, this moment where Jane shows up, I got so choked up. Like I said, I can't imagine what this was like for people who hadn't seen it in ages. Jane being the person to start off this film is perfect because she's one of those people that feels like such a part of Deadwood, but also like she never really fit in a lot of ways. So her having gone and come back is like she's almost like a viewer, right? The way that we are. It feels like she's somebody who primarily was apart from things and observed. And her being the one who's coming back to it all so much later is just a really nice, her referencing how long it's been. It just feels like she's sort of sitting with you, watching it all unfold the same way. And it was really upsetting to me that she was clearly not with Joni at this time. I was just glad that she mentions Joni and says, to her old sweetheart. I was like, okay, well, that's something. But I definitely was like, oh, really? It's been 10 years for you. Where the fuck have you been? And I got real mad at her for a second. So she goes into town and we sort of move from her to the arrival of a train. And this is one of the many things that we see indicating what steps forward Deadwood has taken as a settlement. Because there is the train station that pulls up right next to town. And there is the series of telephone poles that are going up for actual telephones. When I first saw all these poles going up, I thought it was going to be like telegraph becoming more intense and easily accessible, that maybe there wasn't just the one telegraph office in town anymore. But no, the actual phone service has begun, which I just don't think I realized how early telephones were out there doing their thing in the world. Like, that is bananas to me. And don't get me wrong, it's not like they function the way that they do now. You had an operator that you had to speak to. You had to share the phone with the entire rest of the town. Like, it's definitely a whole other beast. But the fact that it was extant at all, I was really startled by it. And we see Alma coming into town. And Alma is still with Sophia. This is not the same actress who played Sophia in the show. But goddamn, if she doesn't look just like her. It's crazy. I was just like, I don't know where they found her. And I guess she doesn't really need to be that amazing an actress because she doesn't have a terrible lot to do. But I was just really surprised to see how close they were able to come with her whole facial structure and everything. There's no way that you wouldn't immediately think that's her. And Alma is she's of interest to me, and it's a shame that we don't get to spend more time with her and see what exactly she's been up to. Because I was surprised to see that she never remarries again. She is still being called Mrs. Ellsworth. And to a degree, I guess I should have expected it, because one of Alma's main personality traits is independence and a resentful feeling towards the fact that she as a woman is seen as subservient to any man that would be in her life. Like, even though Ellsworth did not treat her that way, it was still a situation that she was forced into by society, marrying him at all. So to that point, I totally understand why being married again would not really appeal to her. However, I did sort of think that she would eventually meet somebody that she cared about the way that she cared about Seth. And it's a shame that she is obviously still so hung up on him, because he has completely moved on with his life. When we see him with Martha, it is the chemistry between them is very real. Like, you can feel it. And they have 3 children of their own now, which is wonderful. I was like so delighted to see that they were able to sort of, not replace William, obviously, but to create something of their own that doesn't belong to his brother in any way. And I don't mean that to be like William belonged to his brother. And it doesn't mean either that Seth loved him any less, because maybe loved him as much or more in his own way because of William's connection to his brother. But it is really nice to see that they were able to move forward and create something of their own. And Alma being so hung up on Seth still is really hard to watch. And I want to know what she's been up to, because she left Deadwood clearly for quite a while. I mean, when she sees Charlie Utter, he comments on how it's been like 10 years since he last saw her. And the whole reason that she capitulated to Hearst in selling her claim was so that she wouldn't have to leave town because she'd be in danger. So I don't really know what she sold for if she decided to up and leave Deadwood almost right away anyway. So I'm really curious if they have any information out there on what Milch was thinking Alma had been doing in this time. And if she sold her claim, it's not even like she's able to capitalize on that and continue building this sort of empire from that. That's not part of her life anymore. She got the money from the sale and left. So what exactly has she been doing? What is her goal and plan in coming back at all, So that was the only part of this movie that I felt a little bit unsatisfied by, was that most of the time that we spend with Alma, it is her obsessing a little bit over Seth still. And I wanted her to have more to do that was just hers and didn't have anything to do with him. And it kind of bothered me that it was set up when she finally outbids Hearst and decides that she's going to continue to outbid him for Charlie Utter's parcel of land. It's set that she clearly decides to make the bid at all because she can see how upset Seth is, not because she is herself interested in sticking it to Hearst and defending Charlie. And I just didn't buy that. I felt like that isn't really in her character. Like, being motivated like somewhat by Seth would make sense, but I wanted to see her take action because she just wanted to, because it was something that like, a little bit of revenge because she still hates Hearst. So excuse me. I'm sorry. My throat is like, Patrick is saying, poor Molly Parker had to fly back and forth from Canada because she was doing Lost in Space at the time. Oh, In Molly Parker's mind, she was sticking it to Hearst 4 Ellsworth read it in an interview. All right, well, that didn't really come across in the scene. So I don't know if that was like just not in the directing or what. But I felt that way the first time, and then I rewatched it last night. And there is a definite moment of Seth being outbid, him looking really frustrated, her eyes on his face, and then before she even takes her eyes off him, she makes her counter bid. So to me, it felt like completely beyond, like there was no question in my mind that she did it because of Seth and not because of Charlie. But maybe, or not because of Ellsworth either. So I don't know, but it's a shame because I love Alma so much that I felt like she was done a little bit of a disservice, but I'm also super glad to see her again. So, you can't have it all. Everybody isn't going to be able to do a ton in a movie that's only an hour and a half long. So, all right, let's talk about Al, because he is in really bad shape. I'm not sure how bad Ian McShane actually looks and how much of this is just like makeup, maybe even prosthetics to give him like a pouchier look to the face or what. But this guy is just, the flesh is like hanging off of him in this way that looks like he's been deflated like a balloon. And he is having some real pain. Later on in this film, he pisses himself in bed because he's like losing control of he's aging, and he has liver problems from drinking so very much. I just can't, guys. When I watch these characters pour a shot of whiskey and throw it back and then do it again right after. And I know that there are people who can do that, but I would be useless to the world. I would be asleep 20 minutes later, like just the idea of doing something like that and then trying to carry on with my day is so incredibly foreign to me. It's like, are you an alien? How does your body, what? So the fact that Al is suffering from essentially liver failure is not surprising at all, and is almost gratifying to be like, okay, so he's not just a whole other species of person. His body can no more readily handle it than mine can necessarily. And he is completely unwilling to listen to Doc Cochran's advice to stop drinking and take better care of him. It's, basically what he doesn't say, but what you realize as the movie progresses, is that Al knows he's on his last legs and doesn't really see the point in trying to prolong any of this. Like, he knows better than anybody that he is about to kick the bucket, and is really just sort of leaning into it because, and that feels right. His character, like, he's not somebody he says something about that, like the indignity of it all, And I know a lot of people who feel that way. Especially men. Men especially have this sort of like pride associated with healthcare that causes them to just not want to do the basic things that will be better for them, and not want to take their medications or go to the doctor at all. It's something that I get real pissy about because my father refused to take care of himself, and then he died really young of a heart attack. And that shit has consequences, and then you wind up leaving people behind who you were supposed to be taking care of and watching out for. But, whatever. And it's just really clear that Al's presence in Deadwood is diminished. There's just a different vibe to him than there was before. He was the guy for so long who basically orchestrated everything that happened. He oversaw interactions with officials and the public. He figured out how to dole out news. He was the guy who controlled the way the public saw any events that were happening in the camp and outside the camp in a lot of ways. Some of that is down, of course, to his relationship with Merrick, who is also in this. I wish he had been given more to do also, but you can't have it all. And this Al is somebody who is still respected by everybody very clearly. I mean, there's no doubt about that. But he doesn't hold the sway that he did. He isn't just... The camp has sort of taken on a life of its own, as it is meant to, and gotten away from him. And I would think, in a lot of ways, that would be proof to Al that he succeeded. Because really, that's what he wanted. He wanted to make money, but he also, in the end, wanted to beat out Hearst and have Deadwood be a community of people that looked out for one another and helped the organism of the community as a whole to grow and be healthy. And that really, in the end, was his primary goal. He started off with very selfish intentions. And then as he saw how single-mindedness can just ruin everything around you, he started to sort of reconsider the way that he had been approaching business and people's lives. And Deadwood is what it is in this movie because of Al, in a great portion, I would think. So there's also that sense of him sort of feeling, I think, that like his job is done and he's succeeded and he's glad about that and he can rest finally. This gets sort of called into question when George Hearst shows up again. Guys, I know I should have expected George Hearst to be in this movie. I didn't at all. I can't tell you how my stomach dropped when I realized who the senator from California was, because that's how Martha talks of him to Seth, which in any other context, somebody purposefully not saying Hearst's name would feel really like a manipulation of the script just to like surprise viewers. But in this case, I could totally see Seth having been like, we're never saying that man's name in this house again. So her being like, the senator from California, like, honestly, that really felt very fair in retrospect. But I totally did not see that coming. And he looks almost exactly the same. Hearst and Trixie, the two of them, look to have hardly aged at all. I don't know what the fuck they have done. But everybody else, you can see the passage of years very acute. Like, it's just really obvious. And those two, I just don't know what the fuck. They look the same, Trixie looks a little bit older, but Hearst, like, I don't know if they, like, aged him up in previous seasons, so now he just looks the way that he did without makeup, if that's part of what it was. But, when he shows up and he looks the same, it's like such a shock because it's like a ghost reappearing, And when I saw him, my immediate instinct was horror at seeing him again, mostly because I know that this guy doesn't get beaten, right? The way that I want a bad guy to be beaten. So seeing him in the movie, I was like, oh God, are we destined for another real huge bummer of an ending? The way that, like, season 3 ended on a bummer, an innocent woman is like, they have to murder her. He kills somebody that we all loved just the episode before and then gets to walk away with everything. And it's just super sad. And I was really, really concerned to see him pop up again, that we were going to be like, just totally screwed, basically. And I have to say, you all remember what I said in the previous episode about what I wanted to happen to George Hearst, right? I said I wanted him to get the Cersei Lannister treatment, where he gets stripped naked and walked down the middle of the town thoroughfare and people throw things at him. Well, I'll be damned if I didn't almost get that exact thing. It was so beautiful, guys. Is he beaten? No, he doesn't get beaten, but he gets beaten, though. He does. People literally are throwing shit at him. The whole town loses their minds. And I don't know how many of you noticed this, but I didn't. The dude who starts off the fight in the thoroughfare over Hearst is what's-his-face that played Jack McCall and the prostitute murderer. It's the same dude. They just brought him back to play Wolcott, Francis Wolcott. And he has like a beard on and he's doing it. I love that they snuck that fucker in again. They just keep on killing him and bringing him back in other outfits. It's just, I loved it. I loved it. So I was super, super, super worried about Hearst showing up, but I wound up being really gratified, even though he's not completely taken down. I got some measure of satisfaction because he at least was publicly humiliated and it was made clear nobody in Deadwood was going to be standing for his shit anymore. It was just like he could still pull what he politically can pull, but all of that really made me happy because I was so concerned. So I just wanted to get that out of the way. I know I've jumped ahead in the plot with talking about that already, but I just needed to tell you guys how utterly afraid I became for a moment. And then it turns out that I kind of got what I had been craving from earlier. And I think that was part of the point of the film, right? Patrick is saying, one of the things I love about the movie is everyone in the town deciding not to let Hearst get what he wants this time and standing up to him. Exactly. So, okay, backing it up a little bit here. I have been talking about Swear Engine's health, and then Hearst showing up. We still have E.B. Farnham here. I didn't really talk about last episode how things end with Cy, because Cy is Powers Booth, who played Cy, died a couple years ago now, I think, and you know, it's feels fitting because he was just not in a good place anyway, that he should have died on the show. And I have no doubt that if he were still alive, the actor, that he would have been on the show regardless. But it feels like it makes sense that he's gone now. And Cy, the way that things ended for him at the end of the last season was so infuriating because he murders Leon for no reason other than he feels impotent against Hearst. He keeps on wanting to stand up to Hearst and do something really drastic and keeps on not doing it because he knows anything he chooses is going to fuck him. So then he just turns around and murders Leon simply as a means of getting the aggression out of his system. And in murdering Leon, terrorizes Janine, the new woman who just came in, and kind of, you know, I would assume gets her even more under his thumb from this show of like completely arbitrary violence. And it's a really sad, terrible moment that makes you hate Cy all the more because that's just what he does. He takes out his feelings of powerlessness and impotence on the people around him viciously. And that's 100% who he is. And I have to say, I'm relieved that he isn't around to be like front and center in this show anymore because it just feels like they didn't know what to do with him by the end. And it was really not fun to watch. And him having left the Bella Union to Joni feels totally right. However, let's talk about Joni. Man, not great, man. She is not doing awesome at the start of this. It was hard to watch, and Jane swooping in. There's something so like precious about how foul-mouthed and allegedly tough Jane is, and yet she is so innocent in a lot of ways, and so unprepared for what people how like the destruction that people can bring on themselves. And it's kind of funny that she doesn't seem to see it because she is that way herself. Jane is one of the more self-destructive characters on the show, and that's saying something because we have almost all self-destructive characters on that show. And yet Jane really doesn't see it because in her mind, she deserves it. But nobody else deserves it. Why are they treating themselves like this? And especially not Joni. Joni doesn't deserve this. Why is she doing this to herself? And that's like one of the more heartbreaking things is seeing how much Jane believes in Joni and refuses to let go. Even when Joni pushes her away, Jane shows up and Joni is literally in bed with 2 other women. And they just kind of laugh at Jane. Like they all know the history between the 2 of them. When she rolls in, everybody seems to be totally aware of what the deal is. And I love the fact that Jane goes to Charlie to ask advice from him before she goes to see Joni, to see what he thinks she should say after not having seen this woman for such a long time. There's something incredibly beautiful about the growth of her and Charles' friendship. And it's makes it all the more incredibly tragic when Charlie ends up dead, because Jane's lost everybody that really meant anything to her. And the one person that is kind of standing by her finally in the end is Joni, because Joni sees Jane going through what she herself went through at one point. And I think that's really more what drives Joni is sympathy. Not that she's pitying her, but a reminder of how alone Jane is and how incapable Jane is of having really healthy like relationships with people. And that to a degree, Joni, if she wants to be with Jane, has to keep that in mind. And I don't like to say things like that normally, because on the whole, I think in the year 2019, we have a lot more resources at our disposal to reflect on our behaviors and patterns and try to become better people. But in the era this was set, that was not something that was understood. And so working on self-improvement was a much taller order than it is today. And I really like the fact that Joni seems to like catch herself when her reaction initially to Jane showing up is hostility. She's resentful and bitter about how Jane just bailed, and then comes swanning back in, expecting Joni to be waiting for her. And the fact that Joni has kind of moved on is something that Jane didn't seem to expect. Same time, Joni hasn't moved on. You know, she's giving all of the trappings of somebody who has moved on, but it's clear from her reaction to seeing Jane that Jane has been on her mind every single fucking day. Like, it's just doubtless. I am craving information about what led to Jane leaving camp. And she left for 10 years, guys. Like, keep in mind, because she says that as she's coming back to town. 10 years gone. Somebody leaves and comes back 10 years later and wants to just pick up where they left off. Of course you're going to be pissed. There is absolutely no way that this was going to go well. But Jane just doesn't really see that. All she's thinking is, well, I still love you. I know that I still love you. And I know that things were real and that you still love me. And that's all really that I'm thinking about. And considering where Jane was at the end of the last season, where she wasn't even sure that Joni cared about her as much as we, as the audience, knows she did, that confidence, that turnaround is really kind of striking, that she has this self-assuredness walking back into Joni's life that I don't feel like she had before, even when she was by Joni's side. So she comes back into this, and Joni sort of rejects her. But once Charlie Utter dies, and it just changes the dynamic between them. And this leads to the scene that both times I have watched this, I spontaneously burst into tears. Like, I cried during a couple different moments in this movie, but that was the one that I really lost my shit. When they are in the stables and Joni is grooming one of the horses, and she's talking about how there were a lot of times where she just wanted to be dead. And Jane turns to her and says, "You gutless cunt, don't you ever speak to me that way again." And her calling Joni that, like being as harsh as she is, but it's clearly from a place of absolute horror at the idea of losing yet another person who meant so much to her, and losing that person not because of some terrible accident or violence from the outside, but because that person gave up. She just can't, like that. She just completely becomes unhinged at this and says, "Kiss me and tell me that you aren't going to ever fold, no matter how sad you get, or you know what, just kiss me." And Joni kisses her, and I sobbed, you guys. I cried. That kind of like choking, like kind of crying that I just like had to pause the movie and take a second, because the two of them are so good together, and I just want them to be happy and be together forever, please. That's all I want. And I'm so glad that I get some of that. I get them back together and holding hands and going to Charlie's funeral. And I love Joni talking about how Charlie was the only man who ever stood up for her and never said a word about doing it either. It's so good. It's so good. Oh my God. Guys, I'm just getting all choked up thinking about it. Oh, it's so good. Sorry, Patrick says, "I don't know why she left, but I think Robin Weigert said that in the 10 years Jane was traveling the country as part of Buffalo Bill Cody's Wild West show." Oh, okay. And he says, "Oh my God, me too." Yeah, that just like, you guys, if you were here in the chat, you'd see that my eyes are... I'm not even kidding. Like, I just, thinking about it, it was such a good scene, and it's so emotional, and it's so like, it's such a long time coming, and it's what all of us want to say to Joni too, because Joni's great, and she has been put through such absolute hell that her wanting to be done with life makes total sense. But also, you love Jane so much that, like, Joni doing this would be bad enough, but then the effect that it would have on somebody that we love like Jane would be so catastrophic. I mean, can you imagine Jane rolls into town and it turns out Joni killed herself? Jane would just drink herself to death right then and there. Like, that'd be it. Ugh, guys, I'm gonna just ask her. The other part that got me was Jane shooting Harry. Yeah, I'll get to that, yeah. Ugh, guys, I need my tissues. Okay, so, all right, backing it up a little bit, because I've been talking about individual character shit, and I've hardly talked about the actual plot at all, because that's the way this show is. Am I wrong? This show is character. The plot, it's not like the plot isn't interesting. It's just so secondary to everybody that you care about. So what the main plot of this movie, I'm going to call it an episode though. I'm just going to keep doing that. What it is that Hearst is after Charlie Utter's claim, because it is the very last holdout, and Hearst is in control of all of the phone lines. Like, he's the one that's installing all of this and stands to profit from it. And Charlie is the only person who has not sold. And he has been offered way above asking price by Hearst in a wonderful scene in which Charlie is sitting by the stream contemplating the fact that he has grown to love this little piece of land for its own sake and not because of it being an investment. He talks about his father instructing him on getting a parcel of land and its value increasing, and realizing, like, while that is obviously true based on what you're offering me for this, I have grown to care about this because it's mine and it's beautiful, and I want it for me and not because of the money it's worth. Which, of course, Hearst fucking can't understand. Like, and one could argue, is Charlie even being fully honest when he says that, or is he just trying to stick it to Hearst? I think it's a little of column A and a little of column B. But Hearst's expression, this is a man who just doesn't even pretend to do things in a civilized way anymore. Like, he basically is like, well, you know I'm going to have to kill you then, right? And Charlie's just kind of like, bring it on, motherfucker. And there's a feel to it of the fatalism that, like, Bill had in the first season, of accepting what's coming in a way that I don't really understand fully. You know, I didn't really understand it with Bill either. I saw that it was happening. I understood that that was where he was, but I didn't really get why he was there. And with Charlie, I'm not totally understanding either, but there is a feeling to it of him sort of like knowing that by denying Hearst, he is accepting his own fate. And I don't know why he's willing to do it. Why he feels like this is the time. I don't know. I just really... It was hard to watch him refuse Hearst as much as you want him to refuse Hearst. Because fuck that guy. You know as well as anybody that this means Charlie's going to be dead before this movie's over. I didn't want to believe it, but you can't. Like, it's not going to go any other way. So, once Seth notices that Charlie hasn't been around and goes out to look for him, you are aware he's going to find the man's body. You know already. And sure enough, he finds not only his body, but the general hiding beneath this, like, little dead log and hillside, because he saw the men who shot Charlie. He saw both of them and can positively identify them. But they also saw him. I'm not sure that they saw specifically who it was, but they at least heard somebody moving around. And because the general was always the one that was out there fishing, it probably wouldn't be a huge leap to assume that if they ran into him, they would be like, I bet you were the one. So he is hiding because he knows all too well, as a witness, that his life is in danger. And Seth knows too. Not only as a witness, but as a black man. And he puts the general, Samuel, basically into protective custody. Locks him in a cell and has Harry look after him. Well, it turns out Harry is not exactly the upstanding guy that we all hoped he'd become. He talks a lot throughout this film about his gout and his health just really failing. So, you know, it's obviously the system that was in place then is not the same as now, in that, you know, we don't have like the health insurance companies to worry about and all of that in this era, but still being healthy cost money and getting treatment cost money. And there is a certain implication, I think, that Harry's health has led to him letting his integrity sort of slide, because he needs help and he just can't quite manage on his own anymore, and has probably been promised a few things in exchange. And it's just a shame, because as much as I tried to understand where he was coming from when the two men who are ordered to kill Charlie come in to take care of Samuel, and they set up this thing with Harry letting them bash him on the side of the head to make it look like he wasn't in on it. I tried to be sort of understanding there, because these are two men with guns coming in, and to a point, what exactly is Harry going to do up against these two guys? Is he just going to shoot the two of them? I feel like that's not in his character. Him capitulating like this feels true to the man that we have, like, very on a surface level gotten to know, who has a decent heart, but is also rather timid in some ways. So at that point, I was willing to sort of be like, oh, damn it, Harry. Okay, well, I guess that makes sense. But once we get into the final moments with Harry, he is about to come up behind Seth Bullock and shoot him in the back. Nope. All sympathy goes right out the fucking window. That is low. He was about to rob 3 children of their father, rob a community of somebody who is very good for it and cares about people, and do it in the most cowardly way possible. There is, however, a part of me that can't help but wonder if that wasn't a tiny bit of a suicide attempt on Harry's part. Because he doesn't even try to hide what he's doing. He comes up behind Seth in front of a crowd of people. Everybody would have seen that he was completely full of it. When he's yelling, "You're my witness, the sheriff is trying to kill you." There is no, like, sure, Hearst would be on his side and he would have that kind of protection. But the crowd would absolutely know what he had just done. And Hearst is in a cell. So there is a part of me that wonders, like, what did you actually expect to happen, Harry? I feel like you just kind of wanted to be put out of your misery. I don't know. Maybe he's just not that smart. You know, I don't know him quite well enough as a character to really make an assessment that I feel confident in. But him, when he goes in there, I like kind of missed it on the first watch, how early Jane notices that something is wrong, because she sees Harry walk by her and there's just something in his stance, and she immediately, like, her head goes up and she fucking pulls back the hammer on her gun. It's still in her holster. But she pulls it back and has her hand on it and is watching his ass like she knows. And as he pulls his gun, she draws faster. And she goes up to Joni after she kills him, and is like, that motherfucker. And I love her in that moment. She's just so like... And poor Seth realizing that his second in command, who he, like, really thought the best of, was going to be willing to do something that horrific. Like, you can just see how he's just so heartbroken to know that. And she turns around and goes to Joni that Bill's spirit entered her and protected them all. Because Jane just thinks so little of herself that she can't face that maybe she did something good and right just because she is a good person and competent and useful to have around and a good friend. And Joni has to be like, no, Jane, that was you. And you can see Jane look at her like, for a second of just like, that doesn't sound right. And then there's almost a flicker of, like, Jane seeming to realize what she just did. Like, not that she just shot a guy or that she just did something to save someone's life, that she just tried to foist the credit for it off on a dead man. It's just a moment of clarity, I feel like, in her eyes that's really, really touching. Patrick says, my rationale is that in season 3, Hearst is the reason Harry won the election for sheriff, and Hearst has probably held that over him as the years went on. Interesting, Patrick. I didn't really think about that, but that makes sense. Interesting. Okay. Backing it up, I talked about the plot with Charlie not wanting to sell his land. Let's talk about fucking Trixie and Saul. I think out of everybody, Saul's the one who has aged the most to my eyes. I didn't recognize him right away. That's how much he had aged, that I was just like, oh my God, that's Saul. And Trixie is pregnant, which she didn't think was possible because she's had several abortions. I think she said she had like 7. And she just assumed that because, there's nothing delicate about the kind of fucking abortions that were given back in that day. It probably did damage her. And she just assumed that at this point in her life, that was over with. Plus she's getting older too. So like naturally there is the progression of just not being able to have kids anymore. But she is pregnant and Saul is very concerned about her well-being because of how much of a miracle this pregnancy is. But he's also, understandably, concerned about the fact that Hearst is back in camp and they killed another girl to try and trick him. And it worked. It would have stayed working if Trixie had kept her mouth shut. Now, here's something that I don't entirely feel like fits her character. And let me explain. I'm not saying that Trixie going out onto the balcony of a building and screaming profanities and insults at an authority figure is outside of her character at all. That's 100% Trixie from top to bottom. However, one, she's pregnant and obviously really kind of like this pregnancy means a lot to her. And that right there, I feel like would have prevented her from doing what she did. Also, her friend Jen was murdered to keep her safe. And she's basically flushing Jen's sacrifice, unwilling though it was, down the toilet by doing this. And I have a really hard time believing that Trixie would be this careless after what was sacrificed for her sake. I just don't see her being this careless. And I understand that to a point this has to happen. Somebody needs to call Hearst out. There has to be this confrontation. And it has to be Trixie because he needs to figure out that he was tricked and try and hold that over Al's head. That leads to everybody sort of teaming up against Hearst later because him killing Charlie Utter, obviously everybody was horrified and disgusted by it. But to a point, people seem to be willing to sort of be like, well, that's the way he fucking does things. And Charlie did have the opportunity to sell and he didn't take it. He had to know what was going to happen. What's going on with Trixie is a whole other kettle of fish. This is sheer pride. This is a 10-year-old conflict that he has chosen to not let go of simply for the principle of it and barges in on her wedding to try and hold her accountable. And that is really what sends everybody over the edge. Charlie Utter's murder was bad enough, but when this motherfucker tries to do this, it's just really like beyond the pale to everybody. Like the disrespect and the arrogance of it is so disgusting. And he's saying all of this shit to a woman holding her newborn child, you know, that has to be the thing that pushes the townspeople over the edge. You need this plot point in order to get the satisfying comeuppance in the street, because it has to be something that is not business related and is simply about being decent. And so to that degree, I really get why this had to be, but I just don't believe that Trixie would have been this disrespectful to Jen's memory and to Al, because Al had to kill an innocent woman, and that weighs on him. You can tell when he talks about it later with her. This, as much as he it's not like he regrets doing it. I'm not saying that. He's still 100% about the fact that he did what he needed to do to save Trixie's life. And in baldest terms, Trixie's life was worth more to him than Jen's life. The end. That's as simple as it gets. So he doesn't regret it, but it's not like it didn't cost him anything. It's something that stays with him, that he did this. And so what she has chosen to do here by stepping out onto this balcony and causing this huge scene for really no reason other than to irritate him. It doesn't actually have any sort of material effect on him. It's just embarrassing. That does not feel like the Trixie I know. However, I say that, and she is the Trixie who saw Ellsworth had been killed and walked straight up to Hearst's room and fucking tried to shoot him. So, in that respect, maybe I am overestimating her capacity here. I just feel that the shock of seeing Ellsworth's dead body overpowered her good sense in that moment. She has known Hearst is coming to town for a minute here and promised Saul that she was going to be cool and hide and stay inside and rest because of the baby and everything. So that's the only thing that felt for me a little bit contrived, because we needed to get the plot where it needed to be. But even saying that feels a little harsher than I mean it to be, because as much as I don't really think Trixie would have done this, I also don't see any other character pulling off, or any other character making a mistake that would put Trixie in danger or let Hearst catch a glimpse of her. So I don't feel like there was a more elegant way to do this if this is what you're going to sort of rely on. I'm sure there's something out there that somebody could think of, but, off the top of my head, I don't have it. And Trixie, she is still unwilling to marry Saul. She finally says, after the baby comes, that she'll marry him, but there's a real vibe to her saying that feels like it's just another delaying tactic, in that once the baby comes, she doesn't really intend to marry him then either. And I feel like the only reason she finally did decide that she was going to really do it is because of Al being on the edge of death. She knows how bad he's doing, and she wants to make sure that they have a pretty important moment together before he goes. And what goes on is interesting, because there's another character that comes onto this show who is, she's brand new. I think, is her name Caroline? She is the new girl, who I thought at first was simply traveling by herself, but was meeting somebody. But it turns out that she is a sex worker who is planning to find a brothel to work in, and she heads for the gem first. She might have heard about it from somebody. And at first, when I realized that the movie was going to be making a little bit more of her than I expected, I got irritated, because we have so little time and we have so many characters that I want to touch base with again, that I really don't feel like following around somebody that I don't know and who doesn't have anything to do with anything that's happened in the last, like, she's so young that she may not have even been born, you know, like what is she, like fucking 16 or something? She was a pleasant surprise in the end, because she's sort of a mirror for a couple of different characters. We have a really sweet moment of her talking to Johnny, and Johnny telling her how much she reminds him of a girl that he used to know. And at first he tries to tell her, then that girl moved on. But when she presses him about where she moved on to, he finally admits the girl died and it wasn't her fault. She got caught up in the middle of something that was none of her business. It had nothing to do with her, and she just happened to be at the wrong place at the wrong time. And Johnny becomes sort of infatuated with this girl and says something later to Dan about how he thinks he's going to marry her. And Dan is like, you know, you're fucking old enough to be her daddy, right? And I'm like, Dan, have you seen the men around here? Like, that's really not a concern. Everybody would be totally fine with that. And this girl, she provides, like, when I said a mirror, there's that moment with Johnny, with him trying to sort of recapture what he feels he lost with Jen. There's Al talking to her about Trixie, and the fact that he realizes that he has feelings for Trixie after all this time, that he still, like, really cares about her in a way that he didn't seem to think he was even capable of, and how startled he is by it, and also how, like, how almost ashamed of himself he is that he could be subject to those kinds of feelings like any other mortal, because he just really seems to fancy himself as being above that sort of thing. And that's an admission of humanity that he really wasn't prepared for, clearly. So that's a kind of a lovely moment. And then we have an awesome, tiny little scene between her and Trixie, where Trixie has handed her her baby, and this girl hands it back, and Trixie asks her, do you think that you were meant to be a whore? And the girl sort of, like, you could see, her acting is honestly really pretty good, because she has that simultaneous, like, I'm going to try and make a joke out of this, but also you have poked a very particularly painful wound on me, and I'm going to attempt to laugh it off, because if I don't, I'm going to crack up right now and kind of lose it. And she says, I reckon it's what I'm fit for, with this fucking deadness in her tone that is so depressing and just fucking horrifying. And Trixie says, how hard do you think the man who turned you out had to work to make you believe that? And that's all Trixie says. She doesn't fucking, like, mentor this girl. We don't see her, like, coaching her or talking to her a bunch of times. All she does is plant it in that girl's head. You know the guy that fucked your life up? You're playing right into his hands by buying into this stupid idea that this is what you're worth. Which I feel like is a beautiful, tiny, like, it's, I'm going to put it in your head that you're worth more than that, and fuel that with a defiance against the person who undoubtedly took advantage of you and fucked your life up. And that is a lovely 1-2 punch that is just planting a seed and walking away that will probably begin to put out little feelers and grow. And considering that Johnny is looking at this girl thinking that he might like to marry her and have an actual life with her, she has some potential to get out of this, like, right away, should she want to, and believe in herself that she deserves to. Because that's part of what's been so hard for Trixie. She hasn't believed that she is, first of all, worthy of doing anything else, but also doesn't believe that she deserves to do anything else. The scene with her talking to Al about how I don't deserve 1 second of the happiness that my child gave me when it came into the world. Trixie has believed that since long before Jen was murdered. You know, like, she clearly, that's part of the reason why she tried to kill herself, is just wanting to get out and feeling like there's no way out. And even if there were a way out, what right do I have to take that way out? Like, this is where I belong. And if I'm not here, then I should be dead. And those are really what I'm worth. And I love Trixie putting this in this girl's head in such a brief and poignant little moment of her seeing a girl standing in front of her that reminds her so much of herself, obviously, you know? So, and I should mention too that, like, overall, Deadwood just has a lot more women in it than it used to. And I mean that as beyond the women that are working in the brothels, obviously, because they barely ever left the building, right? You hardly ever saw them walking around outside. Trixie being out on the street was really notable, because she was one of the few that was given the leeway to, like, come and go whenever she felt like it. And now when we walk down Deadwood streets, we see other women, other children. There are families here. Like, this is clearly a community that has stopped being such a edge of the knife, dangerous place, and has started to become settled and civilized. So that, coupled with the fact that Joni has been left the Bella Union, and then we have Trixie, who's going to be taking over the Gem and not necessarily running women. Like, they talk about turning it into a dance hall and doing away with the brothel altogether. This is a real empowering moment for women in the show and in Deadwood, like, as a town. We have women in power here in a way that we did not see when we started off, and we didn't really hope to see. Like, we wanted Joni to have her own place, but she was going to be dependent on a man for the funding to get it. And don't get me wrong, she was dependent on Cy leaving it to her. It's not like she built the Bella Union herself, but there is no man involved anymore. You know, Cy's dead. Eddie's gone. The whole thing with Eddie was kind of weird. I found out that the guy who plays Eddie simply refused to show up to film his death scene. So there was a lot of, like, they had been going to have him be caught stealing and, like, Cy murder him, but he just wouldn't do it. So they decided to talk about him as if he just somehow, like, left town and got away, which is a real weird thing for the show to leave that kind of. I wonder about that with the dude who played oh my god, Aunt May. What is the name? Aunt Lou's son. Because we didn't get resolution on that either. But the fact that we have so many women who, and I assume, I'm thinking about it now, I had assumed that the bank was still owned by Alma, but now I'm realizing I don't know that, because the bank's, like, prospects were backed by the gold claim. So I don't know if that's something that's still hers, or if that's been given away to somebody else or sold, or what. If Hearst has taken over the bank too. I wonder about that. I don't remember if that was mentioned when he, like, signed the papers with her or not. Let's see. Patrick is saying, I love her story. She doesn't really want to be a prostitute. She's uncomfortable and scared by those two gunmen off the train. She tries to proposition Al, Johnny, and gets turned down. Then Trixie finally basically says, you don't have to do this, and she ends the movie laughing in the snow with Sophia like the kid she still is. And not to throw you off, but I don't know if you noticed, but Sophia is holding Jane's hand at the funeral. The camera doesn't focus on it, but you can see it, which I thought was a sweet thing when you know their history. I didn't see that. That is sweet. Because Jane, like, was the primary caregiver of Sophia right after all of the worst things in her life fucking happened. So I don't really, like, remember the relationship that they had But rewatching the first season really, I can't tell you how glad I am that I've been rewatching the show while covering later episodes, because it just throws so many things into perspective and really startles me with reminding me of like how different characters were at the beginning of the series versus now. And Jane being as close to Sophia as she was for, granted, a very short time, but a really important time. That makes a lot of sense, and that's really sweet. And especially because Sophia and Charlie, like, they went and absconded with Sophia to make sure she wasn't murdered. They were the ones who made sure that she was going to be okay. I wonder how much of that Sophia's aware of. You know, like, what would it be like to find out years and years later that somebody had been intending to kill you and that your friends helped, like, keep you safe, but you had no idea? And then you have to go back to the town where the man who had been gonna kill you is still, like, a prominent member of the community, you know? Like, how weird. I don't think that Alma would tell Sophia any of that. I have no doubt Sophia's in the dark, but I just can't help but think what it would be like to actually find all of that out. So, okay, I'm jumping all over the place, and I can't believe that I have been talking for an hour and 15 minutes. I only have 15 minutes left of this. Because there's so much to talk about, you guys. I just can't with all of it. The whole scene with Hearst bidding on the claim, on Charlie's claim, is really, really well done. It's overlapped with the two men that Hearst paid to kill Charlie going into the jail to get Samuel. And y'all know what an incredibly visceral reaction I had to the last time that somebody assaulted Samuel. Like, it was so difficult for me to get through the episode that I knew something was going to have to come for the general this time. There's no way that he's getting out of this unscathed, because it's not happening. But I had such dread in my gut because I just didn't know how it was going to go down. And the way it does, with Harry just betraying Seth and like rolling over to let them get at him, and then they can't even just try to lynch him. They have to beat the shit out of him first, just for fun, because they're shitty, terrible dudes. They shot Charlie and stand over him making jokes about his brain pouring out of his head, about how looks like he's losing his mind. Like, the kind of people who can do that are straight up no longer human beings in my eyes. That's not a person. That's straight up, you're not a human being. I'm sorry if you can be that kind of like cold and heartless. So their handling of Samuel and beating the ever living shit out of him, I'm not sure whether or not he was supposed to live through this, because once we have Seth visiting with him later, it feels like a deathbed scene. It might not be, but the way the doctor talks about his injuries being really extensive, it could be. So I'm like, as much as I want the general to not get fucking lynched, a slow death because of getting beaten and rupturing your organs isn't really better. And it leads to this fucking amazing confrontation, guys. Like, this show has always been really good with its action portions, but this really took the cake. The speed at which people die and how startling it is. Even though you like kind of should see parts of it coming, you're still like, what? I had to rewatch the scene the first time I watched the film, and then rewatching it when I actually watched the whole movie over again, I was still just like, good God. Because these guys, the auction is slowly escalating as everybody starts to realize that they can fuck over George Hearst collectively if they work together. And they all start to put in bids. And I love that Joni puts in a bid too, because it's on Charlie's behalf. Like, I love that she does that. I love the fact that when Alma makes her bid, there's a close-up on Sophia's face as she's sort of smiling, because of course Sophia is going to fucking hate this man's guts. He took Ellsworth away from her. And just the pan around and Al watching from above as this unfolds. I feel like this is more than anything the moment that Al feels like this town's going to be okay. Because they all decide that they are going to band together, even more than the little people getting together to beat the shit out of Hearst in the thoroughfare. These are people with power deciding that they are going to speak Hearst's language. Beating the shit out of the guy is all well and good, and humiliating him is absolutely great. But this is a very specific kind of humiliation that George Hearst is not fucking used to. And getting to watch this happen is so wonderful. But then, of course, it transitions to Hearst winning in another way, because Seth gets notified that they have gone after the general, and he runs out there and finds them beating the shit out of him. One of these idiots tries to take Wu's grandson hostage. Wu's grandson, who can speak English and Chinese and is serving as the translator go-between for Wu and Al now, which I love so much. I love the fact too that Wu is like worried enough about Al to bring him medicine. He's just like, dude, come on, take care of yourself, do something. And Al is just like, fuck you, no, I'm not doing this. And how irritated Wu is by it. But this dude tries to take this kid hostage, and Seth just immediately shoots him in the head. He really had no idea who he was fucking with. Holy shit, he's so quickly killed that I was even like, whoa, what just happened? Holy shit. And then he grabs the other dude, and this dude's like, really? Are you going to, I'm a white man, how could you? And he's like, you killed Charlie Utter, a white man. And the guy's like, who says? And from the ground, with like his shaky breath as he's being bleeding internally, the general says, I say, he's the one. And I was like, oh, dude, thank you. You're wonderful. I know what this is costing you. Mad respect. And I love that Seth, he does this the second time. The first time, he comes into town with Charlie Utter's body and goes straight to fucking Hearst's front door and is just like, I need to talk to him. And is very confrontational with it, which of course I love, but I also was just kind of like, Seth, what are you doing though? Like, really, what do you plan to do right now here with this? This time, he's got a witness, a man who had been hired to commit murder on Hearst's behalf. And he has just about gotten this guy to say it was Hearst. And just as the guy begins to say it, he gets shot in the head. And the instant that guy shoots the killer in the head, Seth shoots that guy in the head. Like, it's just boom, boom, like almost instantaneous. I was watching, I was just like, oh my God, I can't believe how fast this, like, it was just so well done. And her standing there observing this whole thing, completely impassive, because he is so above it. Like, he just knows that there's nothing that Seth's going to be able to do to get to him. And he says something to Seth about how, like, well, I guess that you really think the fact that you're a marshal is going to mean you are above. And he says something like, any sort of unfortunate circumstances. He basically is like, you think being a marshal is going to keep you safe from me murdering you? Think again, buddy. And I just love the fact that Seth is just like, you keep thinking that you're above everything, and that's not necessarily true either, buddy. And later on, we see that that's a little bit true. He doesn't get the actual comeuppance that he deserves, but he isn't as untouchable as he thinks he is. And I think that startles him a little bit. And it's at least enough for me to feel like he got repaid for what he did to Charlie Utter. Never will there be enough to get back at what he did to Ellsworth. Because Charlie Utter, I think, consciously made a choice that he knew was going to lead to his death. Ellsworth, it was just such a complete, like, it was just, Ellsworth had not seen that shit coming. Nobody saw that coming. We all should have, but, and that's not to say that Charlie deserved to die, but there is just a whole different attitude that I feel like he approached it all with. So anyway, the movie ends with a really touching scene between Al and Jewel and Trixie. I was so thrilled to see Jewel back. Dan is another one that was like almost unrecognizable. He's just so completely cleaned up. And I was like, what happened to you? Trixie looks pretty much the same. Jewel looks different. Like it's not just that she's aged. She's got a whole other, like, I don't know what it is. It's like her body shape has changed. And I don't mean just like she's gained weight or anything. And I'm wondering if something, because she had a sort of a brace around her back. And I'm wondering if it's supposed to be that there have been more advancements with like the technology to help her with walking. And that's supposed to be part of what's going on, because it looked like, Patrick says the actress had just had spinal surgery. She was wearing a brace. That's what it is. Okay. I was like, am I imagining that? Because she's got something around her outside too that's like leather, and it almost looks like a corset, but like, you know, but I was so happy that they got her back, because I was really like not expecting it, to be honest. And when I saw her walk out and that whole, her interaction with Al, like right at the start, I was just so touched. And she goes up there and asks him if he wants her to rub her feet, or wants her to rub his feet. And he's been teasing her about like how bad her singing is and everything. But when she sits down and starts rubbing his feet and singing, he starts to sing along with her. And it's just a real moment of affection, you know, that Al so rarely lets himself show in front of other people. He'll have moments of affection privately with a one-on-one, but doing this in front of Trixie, it's a real signal that like, oh shit, he's about to die, isn't he? Because he's just letting his guard down so completely here. And the two of them singing like filters downstairs. So you have Dan and Johnny looking up, hearing him sing. And that got to me real bad. And then as they're singing, the camera pulls outside and it's snowing. And you see some of the brothel girls coming outside and playing in the snow. We see Seth walking back to Martha. And it's really obvious. As much as Martha is confident that she and Seth are solid, it's undeniable that Alma just showing back up again unannounced in camp has shaken her a little bit. It's hard to get over somebody that you know he was having an affair. Like, sure, your relationship was not anything at the time, but nevertheless, there's a real connection there. And that wasn't as common back in the day as it is now. People have all kinds of exes. And, you know, really that wasn't the case so much. People didn't get divorced, and people didn't date and have sex with people they were dating as commonly as now. So there's just a little bit of, I don't want to say doubt, but just, I feel like, self-consciousness. And when he comes back and says, I'm home, and kisses her, it's just such a wonderful moment of him really like recommitting and letting her know you have nothing to worry about. And I enjoyed that a lot. And we go back to Trixie, who's holding Al's hand, and she can see that he's really on his way out. And she starts to pray, Our Father, which art in heaven, which I don't, first of all, it's Our Father who art in heaven, but okay. And she says, Our Father, which art in heaven, and he interrupts and says, let him fucking stay there. And I think he dies. I saw some people arguing about whether or not Al died. I don't see that's a question. I think it's very clear that he died. some people were like, well, he's just still really sick. I'm like, that was a death exhale for sure. But yeah, so that is the end of Al in the camp. And I mean, one could argue that the camp goes on without Al and there's still a story to be told. But the show is Al Swearingen. You're not keeping Deadwood running without fucking Al as a main character. Who is going to be able to have an effect on the story the way that Al did? So as far as I'm concerned, Al's death signals the end of Deadwood forever. But I think he is a perfect way to end the series. His death, but overall the well-being of the camp being better than ever, is a really optimistic ending. I mean, and it ends with everybody having banded together to hold Hearst accountable in the, meager way that they're able to. And Al moving on. And everybody sort of like revisiting their past and coming to terms with things. I think, honestly, that if the show had... I'm not saying that the show being canceled was a good thing, because I think it could have done a lot more if it had been given more time. But if they had done a movie earlier, I don't think it would have had the impact that the 10 plus year span had on the story. I think that wound up being kind of a beautiful gift that just wound up working out in a way that nobody could have predicted or been willing to have the patience for. But I think it really works well and gives this whole amazing series an even more satisfying ending than it might have otherwise had, because there's a feeling of closure that I don't feel you'd get if the characters were as close in time to the start of the series as they would have been, giving a huge amount of room over a decade for people to grow and change and for things to turn around. And I think that encapsulates what Deadwood was about in terms of it being the civilization of portions of the United States, the growth of communities, the well-being of the whole versus the individual. I feel like that time is right on theme, to be honest. So I just, I wanted to mention that and say that I know how impatient everybody was for this, and understandably so. I absolutely would have been right there with you had I watched this when it aired. But in the end, I feel like it worked out for the best in a lot of ways. And the miracle of getting everyone back together to do this one last time, I don't know what else could have pulled this off this way. So it was just awesome. It was really, really good. I am so excited for Owen to get there. We're going to be watching the finale of season 1 tonight, I think, and I'm just dying. I can't wait. So I just thank you again so much, Patrick. I'm glad that you were able to be here for this whole thing. One of those dudes is Patrick Swayze's brother. One of the murderer guys? Which one? Oh shit, weird. We have the redhead, and then we have the guy that got killed who was trying to hold the kid hostage. The one Bullock shoots. Oh, no way. Wow, he doesn't look anything like him. But yeah, Patrick, I really just can't thank you enough for commissioning all of this. It was a gift. It really was. And I'm just so glad that I got to cover this. It would have been probably even more fun to cover with someone else. But I have to say that I've got so much to say about the show that having an entire hour to just talk by myself, I loved it. Like, usually having a co-host is a lot easier for me in a lot of ways, but I didn't need a co-host. I just had so much to say. So it worked out in the end. So I'm out of time and I'm going to have to wrap this up. This is goodbye to Deadwood, but it's not really, because I'm going to make everybody I know watch this fucking show. So it's just gonna keep growing. And I hope that all of you guys have enjoyed this coverage. And if you get a chance to comment on this anywhere, just tell Patrick thanks, because he really came through, man. And I'm just feeling very lucky that I started Spoil Me, because this has been working out so well for me. I have been reading and watching some good shit. So, all right, guys. Thank you all so much for coming along on this with me. And until the next huge series, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.